Hi everybody, my name is Jeremy Siskind. I'm the author of Playing Solo Jazz Piano. I'm the author of the whole Jazz Piano Fundamental series, 3 books. I'm the author of Solo Standards for Piano series. All of the good stuff that you crave. It's at jeremysiskind.com. It's at amazon.com. It's wherever the finest of books are sold. Today's topic is going to be cool, and I'm more prepared than usual because I taught a class on this subject recently, so I've got a beautiful handout. The topic is improvising through melodic variation, right? So instead of thinking, starting from the place of what's the right scale, what's the right chord, what's any of that, but really starting with the melody and improvising with that melody. And I chose the tune Round Midnight because it's a Monk tune, and Thelonious Monk does this so well, right? With Monk, his tunes are so much more than the chord changes. If you just ignore the melody and play over the chord changes when you're improvising, you're not going to get the real feeling of the tune. And when you listen to Monk improvise, at least for me, I hear him always coming back close to the melody. So I want to show you 2 different ways that we're going to practice melodic variation in our improvisation. The first step here, I'm going to be showing you how we can do it thinking about levels. So if the melody is the original, how could we get further and further from that melody bit by bit until we get from level 1 of being really close to the melody to level 5 of getting really far away from the melody. And then I'm going to show you a more strategic approach. So those levels, it's pretty intuitive, right? Who's to say what a level 1 is and exactly how you get there? But in the second section, the second half, I'm going to show you a more analytical approach of changing one aspect or embellishing that melody, changing the melody in a specific way. So that's what we're in for. Now, all of this is going to use what I'm calling a Swung 16th style. And this is, again, because it's kind of in Monk's style. So if he's soloing over Around Midnight, he's Thelonious Monk, he can do many things. But a very common thing is instead of, here's the original, and soloing in that kind of blah, blah, blah meter, oftentimes we get we could call that a double time feel. Although interestingly, the left hand is not doing a double time feel, right? So that's kind of the distinction. The right hand is playing with a double time feel while that left hand is kind of the straight man. It's just staying right where it is. So, that's going to be a pretty common way to solo over a ballad. And to me, it's very indicative of Monk's style. So let's, before I take this off the screen, I want you to look a little bit deeper at this original because we're going to be, pulling it apart in all these different ways. So the original melody, not really that complicated. I should say it's not, it's beautiful and intricate and complicated, but not complicated in terms of numbers of notes or, types of intervals. And then this bars 3 and 4 almost exactly repeat bars 1 and 2, except the last note goes up instead of down. By the way, if you've listened to my video on the Wynton Kelly approach, or the Wynton Kelly trick, or whatever I called it, this is definitely practicing that. Except it's doing it in reverse. Usually we would go up first and then down to feel like we asked a question. But here we're going down first and then up. All right, that's a side note. So how might we do these levels? Like I said, level 1 is going to be very close to the melody, and then with each successive level, we're going to get further and further from the melody. So, of course, there's a million ways to do this. Here's an example of level 1. And what I've done, if you can see in each of these examples, is I put a X below notes that are part of the original melody, even if they're repeated. So almost every note here is part of the original melody. So how does this sound? So here it's mostly rhythmic variation, some repeated notes, and one little neighbor tone. right there, right? So if we go to level 2, we're probably adding more notes each level, more or less. So here's one example of how level 2 is in my imagination. Okay, so adding some more notes in there to be sure. Most of them are still part of the melody, but a few are not. I'm gonna have to go to a different vantage point just because of silly technical things. But let's look at level 3. And so we're getting a lot more notes, we're getting a lot more leaps, and we're covering a wider range here, right? Do you see how now there are some leaps? And we'll talk about those a little bit later and how we get there. So at level 3, at least to me, it's not 100% obvious that this is a variation of the melody, right? We're hearing a lot of other things. And, you know, if you do the analysis and look at those X's, a lot of these notes actually are the melody notes, right? I mean, that's a lot of X's. But there are starting to be enough things disguising it that it's not necessarily just obvious that it's the melody. As we get to level 4, it should be even less obvious. Let's see what happens. All right, so now there's so many notes that are not at all part of the melody. And one of the things that I did in level 4 that I didn't do in level 3 is I didn't start each phrase with the melody notes, right? There's a kind of introduction, and then the melody notes slide in towards the middle and the end. In fact, listen to level 4 one more time and hear that we're not starting with those melody notes. Sorry. Okay. And then level 5, those melody notes are even more obscured. What I tell my students about level 4 and especially level 5 is that you might be the only one who knows where this, where this is coming from, who hears the melody in here. It shouldn't really be obvious to your audience. But as you can see from the axis, the melody notes are still in there. So here we go. And the phrasing even changed there, right? In the original, there's these kind of 2-bar phrases, but here there's a break in between bars 3 and 4. So, that's certainly possible too. Listen to one more time, see if you can hear. Remember that original melody. Hard, I think, to hear the original melody in there. Now, so that's the levels approach. And this is a fun game, is to take a melody and try to move from level 1 to level 5, doing a slightly further and further away version each time. Another way to approach this same problem, I'm going to call the strategy approach. So instead of thinking about moving further and further, we're going to think about how are we doing this. And some of these are going to be very similar to the levels, and some will be different. So here's our original. Let's just remind ourselves of the original again. So one strategy, like we talked about with level 1, is using rhythms and repeated notes. Okay, so really not changing any or many notes, but changing the rhythm. So I just used the exact same one from level 1. If this sounds familiar, that's why. Okay. Second possible variation here is ornaments or non-chord tones. So mostly using neighbor tones, maybe some turns, right? Like this first thing, instead of going, it's going. But a lot of what's happening here is lower neighbors. Right? Here's all those lower neighbors. So this is pretty monkish to me. He does a lot of this lower neighbor kind of motion. All right, we're going to change camera angles again. Next is pedal tone. And what I mean by that is you're going to have a note that's part of a chord, and maybe it's shared by a couple of the chords that you're going to leap to and back, leap to and from with the melody. So instead of, we're going to go. That last part sounds like apostrophe, right? So here the pedal tones are, often a sixth or a seventh away, but not always. Sometimes they're shared between chords. Sometimes they're going to change between chords. And sometimes they're above, sometimes they're below. But what keeps them in common is that we're leaping to them in between the melody notes. Next one is adding arpeggios. And so here you could see with these X's that we're still keeping these melody notes prominent, but I'm adding arpeggios around them. I guess that's self-explanatory in the title, isn't it? Right, so I'm just choosing notes from the chord. So for instance, for this C half diminished, the main melody was the flat 5, so I added the 7th, the 9th, and the 11th, going both up and then back down. For the B7, the melody note was the flat 5, so I added the 7th, the 9th, the 7th, the flat 5, the 3rd. For the B7, the melody was the 3rd, so I added the flat 5, the 7th, and the root. It's not rocket science to add notes from the chords. And then lastly, adding scales. This is probably what I would recommend the least. So it's not a climax, it's not the last one like the climax. But it can definitely be an element that you're going to be adding. So we have... So you might notice on this first B flat 7, I used the whole tone scale. And then just to add a little variety on that second B flat 7, I used the half whole octatonic. And the reason I recommend it the least is that it obscures the melody the most, right? With arpeggios and with leaps, it's still keeping the melody kind of clear. But with scales, any note could kind of be the original melody note. So it's a little hard to track with scales. Listen to that one again. Two very different sounds on those two B flat chords. So I hope that's helpful. Those are two different ways, but complementary ways, I think, to view making a melodic variation in the tradition of Thelonious Monk. But it's such a nice way to get into improvisation because you have a starting place, and that starting place is not random. It's derived from the melody of the tune. So I think that's really lovely. If you want to check more improvisation activities like this out, you might dig Jazz Piano Fundamentals Book 2 in particular. It has these sorts of and levels of improvisation activities. If you've made it this far, try to sneak the name of a Thelonious Monk tune into your comment any Thelonious Monk tune, try to make it not obvious. Could be Round Midnight, could be Epistrophe, could be Light Blue, could be Straight No Chaser, could be Blue Monk. You try to sneak it in there so that nobody notices other than you and me. All right? Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye.